Welcome to the Pod Like a Girl podcast with your host, Mia Findlay. This podcast is all about exploring and celebrating women's stories, voices, and experiences through bold and unapologetic conversations. Yesterday, on December 10th, Australia's under-16 social media ban came into effect. Like many of you, I've heard a lot about this, but still have a lot of questions about how this is going to work in practice in the long term. As someone who's worked in mental health, I also have some serious concerns about what it means for the communities young people build and rely on in the digital space. It's a huge policy change, unprecedented. It's happened fast, and a lot of the public conversation has been loud, but not particularly clear. So I wanted this episode to be a space where we slow down, get informed, and actually think through the impact, not just the headlines. To do that, I brought in someone who genuinely helped me understand what's going on. Dr Susan Grantham from Griffith University is a researcher examining how short-form video shapes organisational, political, and crisis communication. She draws on more than 15 years of strategic communication and crisis management experience and applies this expertise to broader questions of digital reputation management and the impacts of emerging technologies. We talk about what this ban is, where it came from, and what the government says it's trying to achieve. We dig into the impact on young people who depend on social media for connection, identity, and safety, especially marginalised teens who might not have a supportive offline world. What happens to them now? What communities disappear? What unintended consequences come with trying to protect people this way? Susan and I also unpack the tension between keeping teenagers safe and drifting into policing speech and behaviour. We talk about the privacy concerns associated with age verification technology, and she brought my attention to a new policy I had not heard about for search engines which will affect us all. I was shocked by what is coming on December 27th. Under-16s aren't the only ones who will be verifying their identities to use the internet. And finally, we explored the mixed feelings parents are understandably having right now. The relief, the worry, the uncertainty, alongside the evidence-based options the government could have chosen instead of this blanket restriction. If you woke up yesterday unsure how to feel, or you're still trying to understand what this ban will actually look like in real life long term, this conversation will give you the clarity that's been missing. So let's get into it. Susan, thank you so much for being with us today. We are talking on the day of the ban. So this is going to be very in real time as far as when this episode goes out. So really appreciate you being here last minute. For those people who haven't been following along with the headlines of the social media ban, what exactly is it and where did the idea originate from?
Okay, so what it is the removing of under-16s from social media platforms. And we need to clarify there that this is just specific social media platforms. So those that have been identified by the government as being harmful. The idea originated from the South Australian Premier, actually, who suggested it middle of last year, if I remember correctly. Of course, at the second half of last year, we were leading into a federal election.
Yes.
And this is something that the current government held on to, decided to build up and used as a part of their election campaign. So that's kind of a very brief version of how we went from this idea, this conceptual idea, to where we are right now, which is the implementation of the ban of under-16s on social media.
And I did see a couple of stories, videos, I went to an event recently where there was some mention of the fact that, was this also propelled by some Australian radio presenters who, I think it was someone from like Fitzy and Whipper or something, who have been part of the conversation?
There have been a handful, and yeah, you're right. And I can't think of exactly who they were. I think Whipper was one of them who have kind of jumped on board. You know, they see the potential in something like this. So there have been a handful of well-known names and faces that have actually helped the government push this forward.
Everything needs good PR, doesn't it?
Of course it does. Of course. The role of celebrity is immense.
And I do love the concept of Australian celebrity when we're talking about people called Fitzy and Whipper.
Yeah. Very C grade.
Yes. So, what are some of the stated intentions of the ban? What are the outcomes they're aiming for? You've mentioned that there's social media platforms that have been identified as harmful. So, is that the intention here, to reduce harm to under 16s?
Look, it is, the social media ban comes from a good place. It comes from a place of care. And I want to caveat that nice and early, because as we progress through this chat, you will see that I don't particularly agree with it.
Mhm.
But that's not that nothing needed to change, something needed to change. So the point of the ban is that we do have young people engaging in harmful content online. That's fact. We have seen the death of some of these young people as a result of that content and online bullying. And I agree, that is not okay. We need to make change. Young people should not be engaging with some of the content that they're able to engage with.
Yeah.
And that is very problematic.
In terms of when we see politicians talking about this, what are the key areas of content that have drawn the most concern? Because we've sort of heard throwaway, references to harmful content for under 16s. What are they actually trying to target and reduce here?
Well, and that's a difficult question, because I don't think we completely know. There obviously has been some connection to parents of young people that have taken their own lives.
Yeah.
In those circumstances, we are talking about online bullying. We are talking about groups of people coming together in an online space and performing cyberbullying. So that is one aspect. But there is also other aspects of, like, the algorithmically driven content that we see on social media, and the way that it can send us down rabbit holes. So particularly for young men, and the way it can take them down the manosphere, and with some of that very, very harmful content. So there is, as I said, it is from a place of goodness. We are trying to prevent this from becoming the norm. The big issue that I have with that is that what happens when they turn 16? They just go straight into that exact same place with no preparation, no time to digest and understand. And particularly when they're in that younger age bracket where maybe they're still having conversations with mum and dad. A 16-year-old boy and girl are not having conversations with mum and dad when they come across something harmful. That needs to start much earlier. So that's the discrepancy, so you can see that it's the point is to try to reduce harm for young people, which is a very, very important thing that needs to occur. The problem is the actual output, which is, let's just remove them. That's our solution. Let's just remove them.
It sort of seems like removing the step of having learner plates and going straight to P plates. It's like,
Completely. Yeah, I talk about, driver's licenses. We
yes.
don't just hand young people the keys to a car.
Yeah.
We make them do 100 hours. Well, firstly, we make them do a learner's test. Then they have to get a permit. Then they have to do 100 hours. Then they have to do another test. Then they have to have a red P and then a green P before they can actually go out there in the big wide world and be a driver. It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
We can't pretend that this doesn't exist. We can't pretend that removing them from the platforms is going to resolve the issues.
Yes.
The issues are still there. And they're just going to enter into that at a slightly different point in their pubescent years, which in itself is problematic.
And in some ways, a more vulnerable period as well. That's 16 to 20, coming into that young adulthood. And you're still 9 years away from a fully developed brain. So your
Yep.
ability to discern and reason and filter things out, and with no actual further education about media literacy or anything like that, it just feels like a recipe for disaster if it's not managed properly. Are there other motivators which have spurred this on, or is it just primarily safety?
Oh, no, I'd say that there's been other motivators. I mean, yes, safety is at the centre of it. You will see in the legislation or in the policy that it's being put back on the platforms. So this is a pushing back to the platforms and saying, this is your mess. It's for you to clean it up, which is a very clever way of doing it, except for the fact that the ban is on young people, but young people won't be in trouble if they continue to use it. It's the platforms that will be in trouble. On one hand, that is excellent that we're pushing back on the platforms and saying, let's fix this mess. The problem is that it's let you fix this mess, not let's do this together as a collective and find ways that we can resolve these issues. The other problem that I have with pushing it back on platforms, and this is really important for parents out there, is that we're getting a false sense of security that young people now are just banned. They can't use it, you know? So if our child says they want to jump on TikTok this afternoon, we say, no, you can't. You're banned. You're not allowed. It's illegal. Except it's not really illegal because they won't actually get into trouble for being on there, nor will you as a parent. It's just the platform, which means that young people are saying, well, this is not necessarily affecting us the way that it should be affecting us, and therefore we're going to go around it.
It kind of reminds me of the Napster days. Do you remember our days of downloading pirated music and that sort of thing, where you'd see all those advertisements that were like, you wouldn't steal a car, you wouldn't steal someone, so why would you? And it was this big scare campaign where it's like, well, nothing actually ever happened to any of us. So absolutely, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective in terms of this being a little bit of an avenue to pushing back on the platforms in a way that we really can't. These platforms weren't originated in Australia. They have subsidiaries here, but they don't operate out of Australia. And a huge part of their marketing demographics and advertising demographics are under 16. I mean, how many stories do we hear about kids like whipping out parents' credit cards, et cetera, to buy something they've seen on social media? So I can imagine even just that being put back on them is a big incentive in terms of, oh my gosh, we've just lost a huge part of our market here, let alone sort of trying to do the morally right thing and fix these algorithms, which are, pumping out just so much harmful stuff. So it feels a little bit like prohibition in terms of if we just take things away from people, that doesn't even resolve the issue as far as the core issue they're trying to fix here. Because I've heard stories about particularly teenagers who are finding new digital meeting places. They're like meeting in blogs and meeting on other platforms that aren't part of this list. We know that that's a huge part of what is being taken away here is community, is connection. I've worked in mental health advocacy for 13 years. I know that a good portion of my audience are under 18s, under 16s who are exploring and learning about what could be going on with them as far as eating disorders. They're kind of building up their what I call like eating disorder literacy just by watching content and just sitting in those communities. So I know from my personal anecdotal experience that there is an element here of community and connection and education which is being taken away from young people, particularly for marginalised people who don't necessarily have access to support in areas they need, mental health just being one of them. What do you think some of those unforeseen outcomes could be? Obviously, there is the issue of they're out in the wide world at 16 online without any kind of further education in this stuff. But what could some of those other consequences be of just using a ban approach?
Yeah. So the ban approach is definitely making young people migrate. So they're migrating to other platforms that aren't on the list. Some of them are known platforms such as Lemonade and Coverstar, and there's a handful of stuff that we could easily just download on our phones or on our computers. What worries me is that if time progresses and because the government's made it clear that they're watching this migration pattern. So if a whole bunch of young people end up on a particular platform, that could end up being included. So once we start pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, where do they go? And they're going to go to those dark places, the places that the government can't see them migrate to. That to me is terrifying. I know what I was like as a teenager, and that terrifies me. When I was a teenager, we were in that phase of chat rooms.
Yes, ASL.
And the sorts of people that, you would chat with and you had no idea who they were. The difference then is it was very new and very different. And, you were potentially speaking to somebody, in a different country. And that was kind of fun and exciting and almost like pen pally. The problem now is that there's so much more deception that happens in this space. So where I was as a 16-year-old engaging in chat conversations with a fellow from Argentina, that person from Argentina might not be from Argentina. They might be a 45-year-old man sitting in the suburbs of Brisbane instead, and then arrange to meet.
Yeah.
And that's the bit that worries me, is that if people end up in these sorts of locations that are unregulated, they're banned from using it. They know they're banned from using it. They come across something like that and they feel they can't talk to an adult, because they're
Yeah.
not supposed to be there. They're
Yes.
breaking the law by being there. So they're hardly going to go to mum or dad or a teacher or a loved one to have that conversation. And that's really concerning. This isn't something that's going to happen today. Today we're going to see just young people not on the platform. This is something we'll see in a couple of years' time when young people are developing these new platforms or finding VPNs or finding the dark web, and progressively migrating across to these places that we just don't know exist.
It really just has this the toothpaste is out of the tube and you can't scrape it back in kind of feeling to it, right? Because
Yeah,
you're so right. When we were on the internet in chat rooms, and that is so nostalgic, but also when you really think about the context in which we were doing it, terrifying.
yeah,
And it was new for everyone. So people who were predatory, it was even still new for them. We've had
correct.
decades now, and predators have become extraordinarily savvy in terms of how they use these spaces, and particularly the darker spaces that they essentially created for their own purposes. In terms of some of that sense of community and connection, is that the feedback that we're getting from under 16s as well, as far as are they expressing distress at, is it their friends that they fear they're going to lack access to online, or is it a wider online community that they feel like they're going to lack access to, friends who are legitimately, hopefully, actually like 14, 15, not in the outer
Mm.
suburbs of Brisbane and in their 50s? What are they expressing as far as why this might fall on the distressing end of the spectrum for them?
Yeah, look, it's definitely community that I'm seeing. My algorithms obviously push me a lot related to this topic at the moment,
Yeah.
and I'm certainly seeing young people suggesting that they have had an opportunity to meet people outside of their close network,
Mm.
and that's what they're going to miss. Particularly when you start thinking about those marginalized groups, those ones that the people at their school don't have the same interest as them. So they've found people outside of that group, regional as well, people that live in
Yes.
regional locations, where they might be one of 5 kids in the, in the kilometers surrounding them. They have found their tribe online. And we're taking that away from them, or we're telling them to go and take it to another location, which is something that the e-safety commissioner actually said in a behind the news interview. So ABC Behind the News for teenagers. She made it very clear that they should be taking those groups of people and placing them in other locations. So such as chat rooms, such as blogging environments, gaming platforms was one of the suggestions. And that doesn't resolve the problem, doesn't it? Does it?
Mm.
It just moves it. So I think even that kind of statement highlights that this is going to be an issue. There are young people that are relying on these online communities, and we're taking that away from them, which means that
Yes.
they need to push those online communities to another location, which isn't going to be as readily regulated.
Yeah, I even just think about it, as a queer person, I think about, as you say, like some kid in a regional town who has no example of queerness, who has no one in their peripheral vision who is an example of what life can look like as a queer person outside of maybe what their community demonstrates to them. And even if it isn't necessarily being able to connect to those things, just being able to witness and observe those examples is so powerful at those
Mm.
ages, and has been one of the powerful elements of social media. As somebody who gets asked a lot about, do you think social media is good or bad for eating disorders? My answer is always yes, because it's both, because it's
Yeah.
complicated. And it's about, yes, you've got to teach people to be discerning, and you've got to teach them how to look at these things through a certain lens. And it's just extraordinary to me that we've gone so long with this beast of a thing called the internet, and absolutely zero effort to actually implement anything on an education level, which is
Mm.
formal, which can be provided to kids. When, I watch 2 and 3-year-olds operating iPhones, and they look more capable than I do. It's like they came out of the womb with that printed into their brain already,
Yeah. Yeah. It's the exploratory nature of being a young person and, not being afraid to press buttons or try different things. We have these young people that are engaging in these online spaces for those purposes.
Yeah.
Now let's remember that the ban's only going to stop them from having an account. So they will still be able to jump onto TikTok and scroll TikTok, and the
Great.
algorithm will still get to them.
Right.
They will still be able to see some of that content, but the algorithm will still do what it's doing. So they will still potentially be sent down dark places, which kind of defeats the purpose. So on one hand, it's good that those particularly regional people, if we talk queer,
Yeah.
regional queer young people who are able to still see some of that content, but they won't necessarily have the ability to then push the algorithm to send them to stuff that they're actually interested in.
Yeah.
Instead, it's going to be an unregulated, non-account algorithm. And I don't know if you've ever played with a platform like TikTok when you're not logged in, and it can do some very, very weird things.
It does.
Yes, that's kind of the beauty of being logged in, is that you can force it to take you to places you want it to take you to. Now, there's something very important in that, which is the human in the loop, which is what you were kind of alluding to before, that we always need that human in the loop. Now, I'm talking today to a government department about AI, and that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about, is the fact that even in the world of AI, we still need human in the loop. In this world of social media and social media safety, we need human in the loop. We need a young person to be able to engage online and have some sort of education space, parental home environment, school environment. I don't know where it belongs. I know for some people it can't belong in the home, but they need a place where there is a human, a physical person that they can go and talk to and unpack things and learn more about how these algorithms actually work, and learn the tactics on how to push it away from stuff they don't feel comfortable with. This is something that I'm already talking to my kids about, and they're only 7 and 8, that if they hover over something, that's going to keep pushing that content to them. So if they ever see something that they don't like, move, keep going. Don't look, don't engage, don't watch. Keep going and hover over something that you do like, so that the algorithm recognizes you don't want that and instead you do want this. That's the education that young people need. They need
Yeah.
to learn how to play in this space safely.
What do you think the education needs to be around being able to be more discerning, like social media literacy? And
Mm.
was that a piece of this conversation in considering implementing this ban? Was there any forethought about, well, we could do the ban, or we could do these things, we could introduce more education, or did we just go straight for ban?
We went straight for the ban, and the circumstances we've got to remember. There was an election coming up. We needed something very quick. An education program is a long-term thing. So I wrote a conversation article about this end of last year. I mean, that's how long we've been talking about other solutions. But in that conversation article, I pointed to things like smoking campaigns. We didn't see a change to people's smoking habits immediately. We went down a 20-year long campaign where it took 20 years to actually see an impact on people's smoking behavior. That's a long-term solution, and that was what was required. And I think for some people, they don't like that idea because, like, if you think about the smoking ban, there were a bunch of people that weren't impacted by the not smoking ban, but smoking campaign. It was almost like we kind of said, well, they're a bit too far gone. We're just going to have to ignore them. Now we need to tackle these young people and make sure that they don't do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's it's a ethical dilemma, isn't it? And a similar thing does need to happen here as well, where, okay, sure, let's do this ban. Let's see if that helps the people right now. But we need to actually now target my kids' age, the 7 and 8-year-olds. We need to make sure that by the time they hit an age where they feel pressured into engaging in social media, that they know how to do it properly.
Yeah. Some of the discussion I've seen is Especially as people, as this tends to happen, as something draws closer, more and more people become aware of it, even though, as you say, this conversation's been happening for some time, especially people at the center of the conversation have been more aware. But some of the concerns I've seen raised by commentators is that the line between keeping people safe and policing their behavior and speech can be quite close.
Yeah.
And this feels like one of them because, as you say, compared to the smoking education sort of long-term plan, that feels more like we're giving people informed choice versus we're just going to take this thing away from you. How do we meaningfully distinguish between those two in a situation like this? And do you think that's a realistic concern for people to have, that this could extrapolate out to something bigger for maybe future governments who might have a different intention? And is this a bit of a potential blueprint and roadmap for taking things away from people, access away from people, without any kind of grey area? It's just this thing is now gone.
Yeah. Look, it's one of a couple of things that are actually on the horizon, and I'm not sure that people fully are aware of the next phase. It's not related to the social media ban. It's something very separate that the government and search engines are doing, and that's related to the uploading of identification for certain search processes, that if you're logged in to Google or what's the other one, Bing, that you actually now need to identify yourself to be able to search. This is to help regulate search approaches to quite concerning content. Once you start to look at the different things that are happening on the horizon, I can see why people are going down that path of, oh my goodness, are the government trying to prevent us from doing things or watch us more closely? I don't think either necessarily have that intention. It is about safety. It is about making sure that we are helping people to use technology appropriately. But again, I can see why people think that. And I can see how in other circumstances or other governments or other countries that this could actually be very, very problematic.
Just to sort of loop back a little bit. So this plan, as far as Google being search engines, does that apply to all searchers, all people using those platforms, those search engines, that's now going to be an access point, that you have a hurdle that you have to get over to access search engines? What are the details of that?
Yeah, so 27th of December is when this commences. It's my understanding that it was actually brought in by the search engines, that it wasn't, something imposed on them necessarily in the same way that the social media stuff has been. It's a little grey at the moment. I'm not fully aware of exactly how it's rolling out. I know it commences on the 27th, and that it is when you are logged in. So most of us are logged in all the time. We're logged in through our emails, we're logged in through our work. When you are logged in and you want to use those search engines, there will be a requirement for some form of identification to be connected to your account.
Right.
The reason there's a connection between the two, and a lot of people are connecting the two, is because for some young people to confirm their age, they're going to have to upload identification. So we're starting to see this move towards these platforms requiring our official government ID to be able to then access the things that we would already be able to access. You can see how this probably won't affect too many people. We will still need to upload our identification, but we're not going to be watched in the same way, because we're not searching for, pornographic content, for instance.
Beef Wellington recipes.
Yeah.
And mushroom dehydration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to be as intrusive as some people are implying, but it is just another thing that is occurring this year, this month.
And I think, as you say, there is a middle ground to these things, because I certainly hear that and go, oh, wow, that feels like a level of Big Brother we haven't seen before in the Wild Wild West that is the internet. But don't get me wrong, as a creator online, would I like to see more people actually attached to their accounts when they're interacting? Absolutely. I think that would really have people a little bit more concerned about the consequences of their behavior online. But that has certainly gone under the radar because that's the first time I've heard that. So that is
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. And there've been a few media reports on it. As I said, this is less about government imposing this. And I think
Yeah.
that's why there's been less on it, because unlike the social media ban, which has been very much the government pushing this onto platforms, this has been the other way around. So, we are in this very strange place where we're trying to find solutions to big problems. Those solutions won't always be the right solutions.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, this is going to be very problematic. For some people, it's going to require them. Like I think about my parents, for instance, they're going to have to look at ways to upload identification. I don't think they're going to know how to do that.
They'll call you, Susan.
Of course, they'll call me.
I get these calls every day.
I'll be driving down that highway to go see them. It's that sort of stuff. But what happens to the people that don't have a Susan? What happens to the people that don't have a Mia?
Yeah.
How are they going to actually continue to do the things that they do? That's what becomes very concerning when we add all of these regulations and solutions to this space, is that we're in such a weird moment in time when it comes to generations.
Yes.
We've got our younger generation who are so tech savvy, so tech savvy that they're able to get around everything. Then we have, our age bracket where we're pretty good. We feel pretty good about most things. We're able to solve most problems, but then new technology comes in and we have to learn it. And then we progress up and up and up to the much, much older generation who just have no idea how to do these things. They've been so used to being able to do their searches, look for the Coles catalogue, that sort of stuff. And now they're not going to be able to do that as easily as they thought they were going to.
Yeah. Just on a technical note, with the identification for young people trying to access social media, what is that process? How are they actually facilitating this? I've seen some news stories where it's faces being scanned. I mean, I've seen plenty of 15-year-olds with moustaches. Like, how is this actually going to be implemented? And are we about to find out whether or not any of it actually works? How much has this been stress tested? And today being the day of the ban, are we about to find out, could this all just be a great big flop?
Every platform's doing it differently. And as we know, Meta started their process on the 4th of December. So we're already seeing some issues with this and the process that Meta is using. So Meta is using where they're scanning for dates of birth, first of all. Anyone who's sort of sitting on that cusp or around that, 16 or younger, up to about 18, 19, 20, I think, because of the false dates of birth. They're then looking at things like content and use patterns. So if no one's using it during school hours and then suddenly they're using it after school hours, that suggests they might be a young person. I mean, how that impacts teachers is an interesting thing, or even corrections officers, like they don't have phones with them. At all in prisons. A lot of nurses don't have them if they're in theatre, for instance. Like my husband is a doctor and a surgeon, and he doesn't have his phone with him when he's in theatre. So there might be other people that get grouped into that, because of weird use patterns.
Yes.
Once that then occurs, it's my understanding that they're kind of checking for or flagging the accounts. And the accounts have to provide, they have the option of a selfie or an identification. So the selfie is where your image gets scanned to determine whether so this is the facial age verification technology, and it's not 100%. It is identifying some over 16s as being under 16, and it is identifying some under 16s as being over 16. So as you rightly point out, matured boys who, we're talking 14-year-olds who do have full beards, they do exist. They're getting through the ban. Yet 18, 19-year-olds are having to then justify their age to be able to continue to use their accounts. So they right now are cut off, and now they have to go through the motions of actually proving that they are in fact over 16.
And we know
Yes.
social media companies are great at getting back to you when you've got a query.
Oh, oh, don't get me started. My gosh, I know, I know. I used to work in police, and I have stories of even trying to contact them in a very official capacity and get nothing.
Mm.
So it can be very, very frustrating. What is then a little bit of a topic right now, and this is something that some people don't think about, is when you upload your identification, how long is it staying with them? You know,
Yeah.
what's the rules there? And it's conflicting information. We've got the minister indicating that it should only be there for 7 days, but we've got the platforms. If you look at the Meta rules around facial recognition and identification, they
Mm.
indicate that they hold it for 30 days.
Right.
So, but of course, if they hold it for 30 days, where is it going? It's going offshore
Mm.
into a big database. The risk that there could be with regards to breaches is quite immense. So, if there's one bit of advice that I can give from that perspective, it is if you do have to provide an identification, choose one. So,
Yeah.
if you've been flagged on multiple platforms and you need to provide your ID, choose one ID. Don't use your license here and your over 18s here and your passport here. One. Because if you've got one across those and there is a breach, it's just one piece of identification that you've got a problem with. It's not multiple.
Yeah.
So that's one big thing that a lot of people are trying to get across at the moment. And also, if you have that choice between identification and facial scan, so not just the selfie style, but a facial scan biometrics, avoid the biometrics for the simple reason that that's connected for a lot of us to our phones. It's what
Yes.
opens our phones. It's what helps us use Apple Pay.
Mm.
It's what
Mm-hmm.
gets us into our bank accounts. It's what, if you start looking at what your biometrics are actually connected to, hugely problematic if you
Yeah.
allow those platforms to access that as well.
Great advice. What are we hearing from parents in terms of in support, not in support, neutral? Does it vary by age of child and how concerned they are versus how opposed they are? Where is that consensus sitting as far as what we're hearing?
It's all over the place.
Yeah.
It really is. I'm hearing some parents saying this is wonderful. I can now blame the ban
Yeah.
for not letting my kids use things,
Scapegoat,
which
love
is
it.
exactly, which is
Mhm.
wonderful for them. I'm hearing other parents. I was on a radio panel just on Monday with a fellow who has a 14-year-old. And he was saying, his kid's into cricket. He's using YouTube to watch old test matches. I mean, it sounds horrendous to me, but good for him.
Yeah.
And so he has a big problem with the fact that his child is now not going to be able to be logged in and, save those or like them or engage with them in the way that he was, because that's actually quite a wholesome thing that he's doing. And that's going to be taken away from him. So there's
Mm.
a lot of parents out there that do have a big problem with this because they feel like the government's telling them how to parent. And then you have others who are saying, actually, this is wonderful because I'm really struggling
Mm.
to rein in this issue of social media. So again, there's no one size fits all. This is the big problem here, is that, for some people, it is very important to have, wave that red flag to their kids and say, this isn't me telling you, I'm not being the big bad wolf. This is the government telling you, versus, parents even like myself who now have to think about, how am I actually going to tackle this with my kids, given I want them to be engaged. I want them to know how to use these platforms
Yeah.
without them suddenly being the kid at school who has the relaxed parent who lets them use it when they're not supposed to. So it's a really tricky space for me right now in how am
Mm.
I going to make sure my kids are going to be educated, but not be that, cool parent that lets, because I'm certainly not going to be that cool parent. I'm going to be the mean parent that teaches them how to use it well.
Yes.
But how does that look to everybody else?
Mm.
So it's such a hard space for those of us with children in how we're actually going to parent the way we want to parent with this restriction in place.
Yeah. In your perfect world, as somebody who understands the mechanisms of this as a parent, but also from the inside as well, as far as how these things are versus how they could be. Were there more effective evidence-based alternatives? And what would it look like to you in a perfect world? How would this have gone?
Mm. In a perfect world, we would do something similar. So I've pointed to Finland quite a bit. They have a fantastic system. It's not a one size fits all. We wouldn't be able to just pick it up and bring it to Australia. But what they have over there is a digital education system. So it's a literacy system. It starts from the age of 4. So when kids are in kindergarten, they're being taught how to engage in this online space.
Yeah.
They've been shown how to use the technology, but how to use it well, how to use it safely. That progresses right up to the end of school. So things like where in our English subjects, we do critical thinking, where we maybe read a particular text and then we critique it and we have those conversations. They're using that same concept, but in the online space. So here is a bunch of content. How are we unpacking that? How are we feeling about that? Is this, is this misinformation? Is this disinformation? How do we actually verify what we're engaging with? So it progresses all the way up to the end of schooling. And then they have further programs in the community for parents, grandparents, etc. So that particularly as technologies change, those adults who are no longer still in that schooling system, that they can still learn and change their approaches to things along with their youth.
Yes.
So it's a wonderful system, and it sounds absolutely glorious. I'm sure it's not without
Fascinating.
its faults. And as I said, it's not something that would easily be picked up and moved to Australia. We would need to look at our own cultural aspects, and multiculturalism,
Yes.
I think, is a big one. And the fact that we have such diverse, regional, metropolitan people and approaches to life. So it's something that we would have to build up, and it would take a long time, and it would probably result in seeing changes in, say, 10 years' time.
Yes.
But that's my perfect world. That when my kids reach that age, we have an education program that is allowing them to critically think about the world that they're engaging with. So taking those very wonderful tools that we give them in English subjects and translating that across to these online engagements.
And you can just see all the cross sections of how that would further so many other areas like gender dynamics, like mental health. I'm teaching people all the time, even adults, in terms of things that they can find triggering to their eating disorder or to their body image distress, and helping them to take back sort of that element of control and choice that they do have when they have the critical thinking skills. But again, things like gender dynamics, consent, all these things that could interlink and could further all of these other areas that we know we're struggling with in terms of being able to reach young people. I really hope that in the long term, this was a drastic full stop, but hopefully with a pause to then work on and develop and implement some of these longer term strategies that you're talking about. That just would seem like such a missed opportunity.
Well, and it is a missed opportunity, and it's certainly not the first time the government's heard about it. We've got to remember end of November last year, we had that very, very fast-paced, not really an inquiry, but we were able to submit submissions to the government based on what we thought was going to happen with this ban, or any other, whether we agreed, whether we didn't agree, or any other potential solutions. So myself and a bunch of other academics across Australia, we all did submissions. There are hundreds of them on that website. Anyone can go and have a look at them and actually see what was suggested all the way back in November of 24. And potentially some really solid solutions in there. And if we were to group all of those ideas and pick out the really good ideas that are able to be implemented, wow, what a world we'd be living in.
Yeah. Election time.
Yeah,
tends
yeah,
to bring in some black and white outcomes versus what we would hope to see.
yeah.
Susan, thank you so much for this. I have learned so much, and I know that certainly in my audience, in my community, there's a lot of parents who have a lot of question marks over this stuff, and just so thrilled that we could get this in the day of the ban. And this will be going up the following day. So it will be nice and fresh for people to come and learn a little bit about what's going on and the mechanisms sitting underneath those headlines and some of the chatter that they might have been hearing. So I cannot thank you enough. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks very much for inviting me.
Thanks, Susan.